Barbara Davidson. I'm with the Los Angeles Times. I'm a staff photographer there, and I am here at the Luminance 2012 conference. There is such a demand for images now that everyone is a photographer, so there are images being produced by everyone. Now, for a professional photographer, does that create a problem? Maybe not so much, because there will always be a need for the kind of work that we do.
Okay, who got shot?
I don't know, my baby.
Okay, we've got help on the way. How many people? Ma'am, listen to me.
I'm going to hang up. I'm going with my baby. Look.
I'm going to give you instructions on what to do, but you need to calm down.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, is he awake and breathing now?
I don't know. I'm at my house.
I need you to stop yelling at me. I'm trying to help you. Hello? Hello?
Look, you can't help me. I'll talk to you later.
It was my grandma's birthday. I came out outside, and then I got shot in the head.
I think the worst part is just the idea of seeing that gun in his face.
That's when we heard like 4 to 5 gunshots.
All I remember telling her at that point was, "Baby, please don't leave me, I need you."
She called my name. And I like turned around and I saw her and she was just laying on the floor.
The only thing I could think of was, God, please let me die right now. I have a baby inside of me.
How bad could hell be? If this is what's going on, killing and raping and robbing and just, you know, this must be it.
I just want to ask that question, why did you shoot Elwin, my grandson?
One homicide, gang-related homicide, cost the county $1.7 million. And that's from the beginning of the investigation, the burial, the arrest, the incarceration, just for one homicide. The gang is in the community. It's a part of the community, and the community has to address it as a community issue, not a them issue or a they issue, but it's all of our issue, and we have to collectively work with it together.
Hi. So some of you might be wondering, how did this story come into my life? I'm a photographer for the Los Angeles Times, and I had seen this violence, these types of incidences happening in my community over and over. And I had been the photographer assigned to tell the stories. And so I had proposed to my editors that we do a comprehensive piece on this kind of violence that's playing out in our communities so that we could get beyond the statistics and we could look at these families and see how it plays out for them in the long term. Initially, my editors thought that this isn't news, Barbara. This happens all the time. And when I heard them say that this wasn't news, after meeting families that this had happened to and walking with them through their journey, I became very angry. And it was that anger that helped fuel my quest to tell this journey that I did for the Los Angeles Times for 3 years. These incidents, these acts of violence don't only impact the person who's directly shot. As you can see, they completely impact and terrorize entire communities. Tori Rowles in the middle, her best friend, Melody Ross. They went to a homecoming football game together. It was the first time Melody was allowed out of the house on her own. An incident of gang violence broke out. She was hit by a stray bullet, and she died in front of her best friend, Tori. And so the trajectory of this child's life has changed forever. People ask me, how were you able to tell this story? How were you able to get inside the communities to find out who these people were? In Los Angeles, often when someone is killed, we get the statistics. We know who they are, we find out their names so we can access where they came from so we could, investigate. Often, though, what happens, if they're shot and wounded, you're not given any indication, you're not given any information about who they are. So I worked with gang intervention workers who really believed in the story and wanted me to tell their story. So they often gave me access to families. Davian, the story of a young boy. He was shot sweeping in front of the church where he worked. And He knew who the killer was. He had recognized him because they had gone to elementary school together. So he decided he was going to testify against the person who shot him, which is very, very unusual because most people don't have they're terrified. They don't have the strength to come forward because they're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid that the gang members will come and either kill them or their families. I didn't want this to be about statistics, and so it did take me a lot of time. I spent a lot of time with these families just so I could document how things play out. Miranda was a 10-year-old girl. Her mother let her outside to play, and she was in front of her house in Compton when a gunman drove up, shot randomly, and hit her 3 times. Miranda survived, and she came home from the hospital, and then the parents all of a sudden are tasked with caring for these heavily wounded children that they're completely unskilled to do. So you're talking about not only are they dealing with the trauma of seeing someone they love shot, they then become their caregiver. And when Miranda first came home, all the kids came to the apartment to see had she changed, what had happened to her. And these 2 young boys, they started flashing gang signs to one another. And they're only about 5. They don't even know what they're doing. But it speaks volumes about how deeply entrenched the gang culture is in our pulp culture and how wrong that is and how we glamorize these figures when, in fact, they shouldn't be glamorized at all. This is the first picture I made for my long journey. It's the picture of Rose. Rose, young mother at the time, she had 2 young children living at home. She had a baby on the way. And she lived in Nickerson Gardens, which is a project in Los Angeles. And she was coming home from shopping, and these rival gangs were warring at the end of the street. They started shooting at one another, and Rose was hit in the back, in the spine, with one of these bullets, and she was paralyzed for life. And the child inside of her the bullet missed her by about this much. So Rose's life changed completely. She then had to take care of her children without her legs. So often what happened, she would just feed the children from her bedside. They had to grow accustomed to navigating in a wheelchair. Imagine, it's hectic enough being a young mother with 2 young children, and then here she is trying to navigate through the house in this new wheelchair. Kids act up. It was difficult for her to have kind of the same parenting skills that she had prior to being wounded. Her and her husband, they used to go and work 50-50 together. Take care of the kids, do the shopping, do all the basic needs that everyone does. Once she was shot, she could no longer take care of the work that she used to do. The stress of the shooting deteriorated the relationship, and I'm sad to say that Tyron, the father, who was a great father because of it all, he's no longer in Rose's life, but he still takes care of his kids. One of the hardest things to hear was Rose tell me that she feels that she's a burden on her children now because she can't get up and bring them to swings, and she can't do all the things that other parents get to do. And she said that she often sits in the car so that way she can watch the kids better because it's easier for her to stay in one place. But imagine thinking you're a burden on your children because you're paralyzed because you were shot from a bullet. This is baby Miracle. She was the child in Rose's womb when she was shot. And here baby Miracle is helping her mother. These children are robbed of their childhoods. This one, Miracle, is my youngest victim. She was a victim in her mother's womb. These situations play out in Los Angeles, and they are completely normal in many areas. And I always feel that this is so unnormal, and this is so wrong. And I believe when situations like this become so commonplace, where you have a memorial for someone who was murdered on the left and a child celebrating her quinceañera on the right, and no one is, it's as though there's nothing wrong with it, then that's when it's a sign that there's something very wrong with it. Danny Farber was shot sitting in a restaurant eating with his girlfriend. Gang member came in and shot him. And here is his graduation. He was 3 weeks away from graduation. They have a wreath for him. And his other classmates are cheering, embracing that they're graduating, and he only has a wreath to represent him. In Los Angeles, when acts of violence like this happen, the coroner decides whether the victim was an intended target, if they were a gang member themselves. And what they do is they examine the body. If there are active tattoos, then the family gets no financial compensation. If there are no active tattoos on the body, then the family get $5,000. Well, I can assure you, $5,000 for a funeral doesn't go very far. The homicide rates are down, yes, but that's misleading because it's disproportionate. In the poorer areas of Los Angeles, you still see much higher cases of violence than you do in the richer areas. Another tragic element in this story is that often you have gang members living in the family. You know, one brother's the straight A student, he goes to school, the other brother is a gang member. And in this particular case, this family, their son, their older son, was in a gang. And he had some trouble with one of the gangs, and they came looking for him. But who answered the door? The 14-year-old brother. They shot through the screen door. The young son died in his father's arms in his father's bed. The families are re-victimized by the judicial system. Often these cases take 3-4 years to ever go to court, and that's even if they get to court. 50% of these crimes are never even solved. This is Josue, a young 4-year-old boy who was playing in front of his house in Long Beach. So typically, a fight broke out at the end of the street. A stray bullet was lodged into his brain. He and his 6-year-old sister heard the gunshots, and they ran. They didn't run fast enough, so Josue was left on the sidewalk. His little sister, Kathy, his 6-year-old sister, picked him up, carried him to the front door, yelled for her mother, and said, "Mommy, Josue's been shot." Now the family have to navigate all the medical systems, all the different procedures, the pain that this little 4-year-old has had to go through because he was shot in the head. He survived, but he's a changed little boy. He was a very sweet, kind kid. Now he's prone to violence. He has severe headaches. He pummels his little siblings. You know, I have 4 brothers. I know what it's like fighting with your brothers, but this is on a very different level. The family lives in a fairly impoverished area, and I believe that just because you grow up in a poor neighborhood doesn't mean you should be subject to this kind of violence without anybody doing anything about it. Josue zones out a lot. He loses touch with reality, and he zones out often. All the kids sleep in one bed. The mom, sometimes she tries to find a place in here for herself, but doesn't succeed very often. She decided that it would be best for her children not to come outside and play anymore. It's too dangerous. So these kids are basically prisoners now inside their own home, and there's 5 of them. Speaking about poverty, a lot of these families don't have the money to move. You think, well, whoa, shit, just move, you know? It's violent there, go somewhere else. It's the same place for all of these families. They live in the poor areas. Here on the sidewalk, Josue's, this is where he was shot. His blood still stains the sidewalk. And a month later, he came back out, and he was waving at the ice cream truck to stop because he wanted to buy an ice cream. And he stood there, and he pointed to the blood, and he said, "Mommy, this is where the bad man shot me." So they're constantly terrorized by the fear of what happened to them. They never really get to escape it. Same here. This is Jamil Shah. His cousin is sitting on the spot where he was shot in his neighborhood, honoring the first anniversary of his death. Some of these families become activists. Some of them become so marred in their grief that they basically can't function. This particular family, Jamil Shah, their son was a very good football player, and at the age of 17, 3 doors down from his house, he was murdered. A gang member approached him, said, "Where are you from?" which is the most dangerous line in Los Angeles. You never want to hear "Where are you from?" because that means what gang are you affiliated with. And before he could answer, he was shot in the head. His father was living, like I said, 3 doors down, and he heard it. And he ran out to find his son dead on the sidewalk. This was the first game that his team hosted after his passing, and Jamil would always give the opening prayer before the game. And here, his best friend takes over and gives the opening prayer. His father had a contract with his son. "I only have to get you to age 18. And then at the age of 18, you're on your own to live your life. You're a man. Your decisions are yours." Now the father feels that he's failed. He failed his son because he didn't get his son to age 18. He got him to age 17. So the depth and guilt that this father lives with has changed him forever. Detectives will come. They'll show up. They ask a lot of questions. They stick around. You know, the first 48 hours, they're fairly invested. You know, they're fairly interested. But these are poor families, and there are a lot of cases like this, so they move on. Half the times, the families don't even realize that the detectives have switched. Often I get calls, they ask me, you know, why isn't the detective calling me back? So I do a little bit of investigation for them. Often you see this playing out. Edwin was shot here, another young boy, and the family gather and just have a memorial at the site where he was shot. Like I said, they're given $5,000 to bury their loved ones, but this family couldn't get their son out of the morgue. It was a month because they couldn't raise the funds to give the funeral to their child like they would have wanted to. Often you'll see this in Los Angeles. We have a lot of car washes. People try to raise money for car washes. And another problem that plays out in our streets, the children that are living in these high violence areas, more than 50% of these kids suffer from a condition akin to post-traumatic stress syndrome. So we have a lot of kids who are suffering. They're not getting the attention that they need because we don't have the services, we don't have the social services to heal these kids, to talk to these kids. So what happens? They start failing in school. What happens when they start failing in school? They drop out. What happens when they drop out? The gangs are more than welcome to pick them up. So you see the cycle happens. People have asked me, you know, why did you stay and do this story for so long? Why would you stay with this story for 3 years when most people weren't really interested in it? And I believe that this is one of the social ills affecting and impacting most of the major inner cities in this country. And I've traveled all over the world covering conflicts. And I wanted to take that same sensibility and bring it to this story and to show people that we don't only have to go to Afghanistan and Iraq to cover injustices. We have it happening right here in our own backyards. And it's very easy to pretend it's not happening because most of us don't live in those neighborhoods. And so my goal with this work was to create awareness so that people would see it, they would be forced to look at it, and that hopefully they would be inspired in some way to change what they see. Another reason why I kept on going was because my own mother had died, and it wasn't in an act of violence. It was, my mother passed away, and I had moved to Los Angeles and started to work on this project. So when people would say to me, like, why do you want to stay with these families? Why do you want to tell these stories? Why do you want to do this work? And I thought, you know, I feel comfortable with these families. I feel that I don't understand exactly what they're going through, but we share a sense of loss. And sometimes you need that personal connection, or you need that personal fire within to continue to do long-term documentary. Because long-term documentary is often a very dark and lonely journey. I mean, I spent 3 years on this story, and many times I found myself on a curb just answering phones and talking to family members and thinking, how am I ever going to get this published? Because nobody really cares about this. But I fought on, and I believed in the story, and the Los Angeles Times dedicated 7 pages to this story. And it created a lot of awareness in our community, which is what the goal was. I wanted to let people in Beverly Hills know what was happening on the South Side. In each particular family, there's a chapter for each family. Each family, I can tell you a long story about how their lives have changed, evolved, and what's gone on with them. I can't because I have on a very tight time limit. So we also produced a 30-minute multimedia piece. And I hope that if you have a chance that you will look at this piece, because this is truly where you can hear the families speak about their own journeys and how it impacted them. And I think really that's where the most power comes from, is from that particular piece. So I thank you. It's 20 minutes, so thanks so much.
Thank you. We got a question. You know, you are a white woman going into an area and a problem that's predominantly Black and Hispanic, at least in Los Angeles it is. Can you kind of describe the skepticism that you received?
Sure,
and how you overcame that? And also your own security being in these types of neighborhoods.
Right. I think that, you know, I've done a lot of work all around the world, so I don't really see color the way people might see it with me, because I do sort of stand out in the communities often that I work in. And I approached the gang members, former gang members, I should say. I approached former gang members who now work together to try to improve their communities. They try to, you know, create a safe environment for the younger kids living there. And I approached them, and I went to one of their meetings, and they weren't very kind to me, and they really had no interest in what I was hoping to do or what I wanted to tell. They were really quite disinterested in me. But I said, hell no, man, I'm gonna come back and come back and come back and come back. And I went back, and I said, contact me if you have something that you're working on that you'd like coverage. I'll come out, I'll try to get coverage, what's going on. You need awareness for a particular project, I'll work on that story. You know, I really needed to build trust. It was huge. I needed to build trust with these gang intervention workers so that they could help me gain access to the families. Because we were all on the same page, but they weren't at first sure of my intentions. And then initially it was so hard to find anybody that wanted to work with me, but towards the end of the project, I had families calling me. I had moms, they had my phone number, so they would call me. And then the terrible problem was, well, whose story do I tell? How can I tell it? So that was tricky. And my own personal safety, I think when I was in different zones, I know gang intervention workers would put out word like, she's in this area, kind of, you know, back off. Obviously, I was in a lot of danger no matter what, though. I mean, a stray bullet doesn't have a name. So I'm just very fortunate, and some of my friends would laugh at me and say, you know, you've gone overseas, you've covered a lot of conflict, it's what I do, but the irony is some of them felt the most dangerous assignment I'd ever done was this one, because it's not a declared war zone in these inner city communities, but it plays out just like it does in many war zones. And I wanted to use that sort of humanitarian sensibility where you document the people caught in the crossfire, just as I do in Iraq or Afghanistan. I wanted to bring that sensibility to the United States so that people can see, wow, you know, we have a huge problem here, and that it needs to be recognized as one before we can try to solve what's happening.
I'm such a big fan of still, you know, long-form photojournalism, but I couldn't help but feel very moved by the video at the beginning. Can you talk about why that was incorporated into the larger story and how that was produced?
Okay. We decided early on that this was going to be a multimedia piece, because I knew my photos would never have the power, the same power that the victims' voices would have. Just hearing them tell their stories and what happened to them and how it plays out, combined with the photography, I felt was really powerful. So we had decided early on that the best way and the most effective and the most powerful way to tell these stories, because a lot of times we were looking back, was to have people tell them themselves. And so, you know, I became a writer, a director, a producer. I didn't really know what I was doing, and we had some wonderful outside help to help us, you know, create a story arc for the broader piece that we did, which was wonderful. And I think for me, it's the way to go. I don't think I'll ever just do a still documentary piece anymore. I think that was a time back then, but now for me, I'm a complete junkie, because the power of the stories are so much stronger, and that's why I hope you guys will look at it, because if you care about the issue and you want to know about what's going on, that's the piece to examine, so it'll give you a broader sense of what's happening in our communities.
In the introduction that I did, you know, I talked about kind of the realism, necessary realism of documentary photography. When you hear about all of these filters and moods and Photoshop and whatnot, how do you feel about the way that consumers build and consume photography vis-a-vis the own type of photography that you create?
Well, I think you can change the look of a photo with many kinds of filters, and I think we're all having tons of fun with that. But you can never create a moment. A moment is a moment. It happens or it doesn't. And no matter what kind of filters people use, and no matter what kind of tricks we have in our bag, the true documentary photographer is the one that captures moments. And moments you have to wait, and you have to watch, and you have to have a sensibility, and, you know, you walk alongside the people that you're documenting. Somebody joked and called me the grief bellhop. Well, if I don't feel how they're feeling, I don't know when to take that picture, because you want to retain the dignity of your subjects. It's not about just taking a picture of someone who's crying. That's ridiculous. That means nothing. You're exploiting people. You want it to be when you're really trying to convey to the viewer the pain that this person is going through and how wrong it was by what happened to them through this random act of violence. So no matter what kind of filters we have, you can't convey moment and emotions like that. They have to be real, and that's where we come in, the real photographers. I hope, anyway.
2011 Pulitzer Prize winner in feature photography, Barbara Davidson.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Barbara.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.